I'm John Fogarty, Treasurer of our Diocese. It's a pleasure to provide you with information about our proposed 22 budget.
I'm Judy Dobson, Comptroller of the Diocese. John and I are going to tell the story of where our money comes from and where it will go in 2022. Our presentation will be at a high level, but you can follow along in more detail with the budget information you should have already received.
I'm sure all of us involved in parish finances can relate to this cartoon. It really does take a ton of money to run this place. In fact, in 2022, we expect it will take $2,878,000 to run this place. So where does our money go? Here we see how the $2,878,000 breaks down amongst the major categories. The largest percentage of expense, rightly, is for our ministries, comprising $1,244,000, or about 43% of our budget. Together, our ministries and the Episcopate make up about 83% of our expenses. Support for the wider church is primarily the contribution we make to the national church. We give 15% of adjusted diocesan income as requested by the national church. These funds support a wide array of ministries and the cost of the national church organization. Governance is the cost of the diocese participation in the governance of the church throughout such activities as the General Convention, which will be held in 2022. And communication is the cost of communicating with our parishes and assisting our parishes with communicating with parishioners. Overall, our 2022 expenses are about $300,000 greater than what was budgeted in 2021. We expect some increases and some declines to make up this amount. Several of these costs relate to the reorganization of administrative and communication duties. Changes include, first, a full year of compensation and benefits for the canons for evangelism and diversity, offset in part by the retirement of the canon for administration. Second, net costs of reorganizing our communication efforts. Third, the first of three $100,000 payments of our pledge to the Chanco campaign. In 2021, the Executive Board approved a $300,000 pledge to the Chanco campaign to fund a matching gift effort to raise the remaining funds to cover the debt for Chanco improvements. The $300,000 pledge resulted in well over $400,000 in additional contributions, which substantially covers the remaining debt. This is an exciting and important development for our financial future. Many thanks to the donors and the campaign team. Next, we had a 5.9% COLA increase in compensation for all employees. We are also adding an additional, very badly needed administrative assistant. And finally, we have $75,000 for the costs of developing the Diocesan Congregational Development Institute. Judy, could you tell us more about this program?
Sure, John. The Diocesan Congregational Development Institute, or DCDI, is a leadership training program focused on developing the spiritual community and organizational life of congregations. It equips leaders to serve their congregation through a highly integrated training experience that engages participants in issues and dynamics they face as leaders. DCDI is a program for clergy and lay leaders who desire to transform their congregations by making them stronger, healthier, more deeply rooted in Anglican spirituality, more responsive to God, and more effective in their communities. And DCDI is part of our Christian formation budget. So let's look at our ministries in more detail. Christian formation makes up about 17% of our ministry's budget at $214,000. This includes the compensation and benefits for the canon for formation, our various educational programs, and DCDI. Mission and parish support includes the compensation and benefits for the canon evangelists, as well as for the canon for diversity. Other expenses include safe church training, repairers of the breach, and the Seeds of Hope grants. Mission and parish support is our largest ministry category at $303,000, or about 25% of our ministry's budget. Camp Ministries is the support of Chanco and the James and consists of our annual gift for Chanco operations of $100,000. The campaign pledge payment that John mentioned earlier, and the funding from a restricted fund for the support of Chanco. Camp Ministries make up about 19% of our ministry's budget. Youth, college, and young adult ministries together make up about 16% of our ministry's budget. This includes the exciting addition of our new campus ministry at Christopher Newport University. This brings it to 4 campus ministries we're supporting. The budget also includes funding for our youth ministry. Our outreach ministries and our Latino ministries together are about 14% of our ministry's budget. Outreach includes the Covington Boys Home, the Jackson Field Home, the Westminster Canterbury Foundation, and the Bishop Vacher Scholarship Fund. Our Latino missioner shares his calling between his work as a Latino missioner for the diocese and as a rector for the Church of the Holy Apostles. Finally, aspirates, seminarian, and clergy support make up about 9% of our ministry's budget. These categories include the Commission on Ministry, seminarian scholarships, the clergy conference, and clergy continuing education. John, that covers our ministries. Tell us about the Episcopate.
Thanks, Judy. The other large part of our expenses is the cost of running the Episcopate at $1,154,000, or about 40% of our expenses. These expenses include compensation and benefits for the bishop, the canon to the ordinary, and the finance and administrative support staff, as well as office expenses such as rent and insurance. But more about the rent in a minute. So let's take a look at where our money comes from. The diocese has an endowment made up of many different funds that have accumulated over the years. Some are gifts from donors or their estates. Some of these are unrestricted, while others are restricted for certain purposes. The executive board has also designated funds for certain purposes, such as the funds from the sale of Talbot Hall. Each year, part of our revenue comes from our draw on our endowment. Our spending policy sets the draw at 5% of the average market value of the endowment over the preceding 60 quarters or 5 years. This results in a more stable amount than if we simply took a percentage of the year-end market value. In 2022, we expect the 5% draw to be $674,000, or about 25% of revenue. The other category primarily results from funds released from restriction or designation that are not held in the endowment. So Judy, tell us about our contribution revenue.
Sure, John. Contributions from our parishes make up about 56% of our revenue. Contributions have trended downward somewhat in the last few years. Contributions vary in size, as does the size and financial health of our parishes. These funds are vital to the operation of the diocese and its ministries. We should be all proud of the support our parishes have been able to provide during these difficult times. John, the total revenue on the slide is $2,664,000. That is less than our proposed expenses of $2,878,000. We are required by the canons to have a balanced budget. Where does the difference come from?
Well, Judy, that's a great question. Balancing the budget means that revenue equals expense. So we draw additional funds above the 5% from our endowment to make up the difference. This is the same as we all experience with our personal finances when we sometimes need to withdraw money from savings for important needs. But we have to be prudent and refrain from making this a habit. More on that later. We project needing to draw about $214,000 more than our 5% draw on the endowment to cover our expenses. Of course, we do not know what amount will ultimately be needed until the end of the year. We try to budget conservatively to avoid any larger shortfall, but unforeseen things happen in the course of any year that may require adjustment. These adjustments may be a good adjustment. We may have less of a shortfall. In other cases, it may be greater, but any such adjustments will be brought to the executive committee for consideration and approval. So why do we have this deficit? Well, here are some of the reasons, and many of them were covered when I talked about the changes from the 2021 budget, but these are a few of the larger ones that you can see here on this slide. Some will be ongoing costs from now on, and others will cease after a short period. So Judy, how do we see addressing the additional draw in future years?
We have identified several reductions in future expenses. We have already talked about the Chenko pledge being completed in 2024 and the one-time cost of DCDI. We also expect to have a $100,000 reduction in a rent in 2023 after. The lease on our current office spaces expire at the end of July. We have located a new office space nearby that is substantially smaller. We simply no longer need all the space we have because several of the staff work remotely, and Bishop Haynes strongly emphasizes being out in the parishes. We will have some savings in 2022 during the last half of the year, offset in part by the cost of relocating. We will also be looking for ways to increase revenue as well. Some possible areas are shown on the slide. We're paying particular attention to the need to identify revenue sources for all new initiatives as part of the approval process. John, how has our endowment performed over the last several years? Has drawing more than 5% caused our endowment to shrink?
No, certainly not, Judy. Because of the growth of the market over the past several years, our endowment has grown quite substantially. Over the last 5 years, our annual rate of return net of fees has been 11.83%. So as you see here, our endowment has grown from $13,644,000 at the end of 2017 to $18,212,000 at the end of 2021. This includes all withdrawals and additions, investment income, and appreciation in stock values. Overdrawing this 5% spending policy has not caused our endowment to shrink. We have benefited from extraordinary growth in the markets, but we must remember that markets also contract and can be volatile, as we've seen in the last few weeks. So what are the implications of this? Well, over long periods of time, an expectation of annual growth of 5% is reasonable and conservative. Accordingly, consistently drawing more than 5% is not considered prudent or sustainable in the long term. Over the coming years, we'll be working to enhance our revenue and carefully manage our expenses in order to maintain our long-term financial health. Well, that wraps up our remarks. Thank you, Judy, and thank all of you listening for your attention and support of the diocese. Now it's time for your questions and comments.